All right, my friends, welcome to another stream. In a few days, actually next week, I believe it's going to be in 6 days, there's going to be a very special day of the year that was really celebrated by our ancestors. And this was, of course, the winter solstice. And this is the day when the sun is supposedly reborn and starts a kind of a new cycle of shining. It is the darkest day of the year and the most challenging day of the year for many people. But I really actually think that there is an archetypal potential in the winter solstice that has not been fully explored. A moment of death and rebirth, a moment of maybe a tender solstice, a time when we really kind of shut ourselves off from our family, from technology, from daylight, the little that was available. And we just look at the sun through a little kind of maybe like make a hole in your wall in your housing, or if you're not interested in that, at least kind of like something in your Venetian blinds or just curtains, just a little peek of the sun, just a little light ray, and just sit alone in your room and look at it. Look at this cold sun, this cold light appear suddenly and then faint away into the darkest day of the year. And you really have to really kind of relish the fear and vulnerability of that state to crack your facade, to crack our false mastery of reality, and to really connect with this nakedness that brought us into the world. Of course, we came out of our mother, but we came out alone because we didn't know who the mother was. We didn't know her. We knew next to nothing. And then when we're gonna perish, when we're gonna pass away, in a sense, there might be people around us, but there's also gonna be a great solitude, a great vulnerability there. And yet we spend most of our life trying to escape from it. And what will you find in this tender state when you really beat yourself up into utter naked, raw tenderness and almost crawl out of this tender solstice, crawl out and just embrace the world like that, without the lies, without the bullshit, without any of it, and just kind of be reborn into another year without lies, without any fucking lists, without any kind of a bullshit, just naked, tender, and alone. Mr. Robbins, what are your reflections on this? Will you be celebrating the tender solstice in the way that I have outlined?
No.
Why not?
I think it's impossible. I think it's impossible to live in the world without. It's impossible to live completely honestly.
I see.
I wish that I wish that I might think that I could, but I'm just not sure that that's quite possible.
But just for one day, just for one tender day.
For one day, possibly on my own. I wouldn't want to interact with people for too long, being completely honest and without filter. That would probably be one of the worst days of my life.
Well, you would just watch the light, and that's all you would need to do.
Okay. Sit at home and watch the light?
Yeah, just like a ray of sun. Did you not fucking hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you just make a little hole in your curtains and you observe it.
I could try, maybe.
Okay. Brian?
It sounds something I'd be into because I have this, the seasonal affected disorder, seasonal affected depression, and so I would probably be down for just some very blade like sunbathing. Maybe I just come out with like a sunburn, like a line down my face or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, like tender solstice sunburn.
yeah, I'm into it. Let's do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, this sounded unenthusiastic, so I guess I will be celebrating the tender solstice in complete solitude. But this is the way it's meant to celebrate, to kind of connect, to really break down the artifice and ask yourself, who am I? Um, who am I? Like when the shell is broken, right? It's like, who am I? Like a crab without a shell, right? Without this fake facade of money and all this shit. Fuck that shit. It's the tender solstice. The sun goes away. Okay. So this sort of stream today might not be for those who actually have the winter blues or the seasonal affective disorder, because we're actually gonna talk about death. And I realize that elderly people pass away, and this is what happened to my grandmother recently. And on the other hand, since I can't think of anything else, and since it's still on my mind, I really don't have any kind of a better sort of kind of a topic to discuss. So actually, this happened on my around the birthday that I had, that has transpired since the last stream. And so now I will kind of show you a little movie as to how I spent the first existential moments of my birthday. So the day before, like, I've been visiting my grandmother every day at the hospital, and the day before I came there, and she was disoriented and thought that she was at home, and asked me to bring her some bread that I bought for her, and wanted me to make her her favorite tea, camelline tea. And I didn't have that herbal tea. I just went to the hospital place and made her the regular tea. She was kind of very disoriented, but then kind of tried to get off her bed, which she couldn't do for some time now. So that was the day before my birthday. And then since I visited her during work, when the work was over, which is around 11:30 at night, I went to drive home, and my tire got busted. So being the narcissist that I am, I did make a little 3-minute video during this time frame. Let's see. So this is where I ended up at midnight, like right as my tire burst, right as I turned into a new year of life. So, and this is where I was hanging out for that time frame. Look, there's some takeout food cart pushing me happy birthday. If you can hear it, it's fucking little gospel. It says happy birthday, Ivan. Happy birthday. Is this a fraud? This fucking extreme tire and towing? So big a lie. I can fucking find it on Google reviews. So this was kind of my big thing there, is that I couldn't find it on Google reviews. The tow truck just dumped me there, and yeah, so that's where I was like hanging out during that time. And yeah, I couldn't fucking find it on Google reviews. I couldn't find their address even on the internet. It just didn't show up. And he brought me there for cash, like for $60, just right off the highway. So
motherfuckers. Yeah, it's all very suspicious to me that I get dropped off here. Reading Road. What does this say? Founded and incorporating 1851. Fucking Reading Road, the shithole since 1851, since the 19th century. Is there anything of substance here? Yeah. Well, thankfully, I'm the only one on the streets here at this time. How is it that I can't find this extreme tire on Google reviews? It's just like doesn't exist. It's the one sort of without the fucking surveillance that goes on. This one fucking place in Reading Road I've been able to locate.
Brian, you have a mic issue. Okay, there we go.
This is a new year of my life. That's what it started with. Literally within the first few minutes of my new year. This is what transpired.
Yeah, so in spite of my kind of mopey voice here, I actually enjoyed it and had a good time. Like, this is kind of a dangerous neighborhood, as I found out the day after when I picked up the car. But this was like a very fitting kind of a place for me to hang out, to just be dropped off there. I just kind of wondered if the whole thing was just a big scam or something, but yeah, just kind of had a good time there, narcissistically filming myself as I was waiting for the Uber. Mr. Robbins, what would you think if you got into the circumstance? You just got like dropped off at some strange place that doesn't exist anywhere?
Probably wouldn't bother me too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you ended up getting home with an Uber, eh?
Yeah, I was waiting for the Uber, so I recorded myself. But basically, like, the next day I showed up there, I was kind of paranoid about what kind of a fucking place that was. And, like, I came there, I tried to call them and nobody picked up at, like, 9 and 10 in the morning. So I finally, just took my mother's car there. And when I arrived, like, there was nobody there. Like, there were some people who showed up and they said, yeah, it's a nice place. But seems like the owner had a heart attack or something. And I just kind of hung around there for a while, and was about to like drive that car with that flat tire to like a tire discounters around the street, when like some guy shows up on a tow truck, and like I approached him and I have my phone in my pocket and I have my hand there, and he's like, what do you have in your pocket, buddy? What's going on there? And I was like, oh, it's my phone. And he's like, well, you don't know what neighborhood you're in. But then it seems like that place is just like some guy who owns this, and then some dudes just hang out there and do repairs. So people like bring in their clunkers and they just like stitch, put some shit together. And that's pretty much what goes on there. But my kind of state of mind was a little bit uneven, and I really appreciated the atmosphere there. Like, that pit bull was very friendly and kind of, was just hanging around there with a huge bone and running around and wanting to be petted. And I hate to be kind of a liberal cliche, but like I was like the only white guy there, and the atmosphere was kind of soulful and kind of like very informal. And they did find some old tire and like replaced my tire for $80, including the tire. Like a new tire for that van costs around $200 alone. So, yeah, it was like the best place for me to be in the end. So then I get a call from my mother that my grandmother is doing poorly, and so I took my car. Oh, and when I was leaving, like the main guy, Carlos, he was like, "Hey, Ivan, have a good day." He said, "No, actually, have a blessed day." And that was really meaningful for me at that kind of a state of mind, um, because even though I didn't have a blessed day, it was just a nice kind of a human interaction. So then when I came to the hospital, I came into the room and my grandmother had a little like plastic bucket or like a plastic thing that the nurses gave her, and she was like coughing blood, coagulated blood into it. And, so I bought some like tissues for her before, like the wet kind of cosmetic tissues, but mostly to like wet her face just to have a moist face. But now I was like wiping that blood out of there and like washing that blood out of the bucket into the sink, and there seems to be like some residue of like some things in there, like almost skin or something. And so then like she laid down and she was sighing like heavily, like like she was breathing, grasping for air, and then like sighing very heavily, like I can't really reproduce it. This is going on again and again. So I asked for the nurse and I talked to her a little bit about it, and we discussed giving her Valium. But I didn't want to make decisions without my mother. So I just waited there for my mother, holding my grandmother's hand for like 2 hours or like an hour and a half or something. And finally, like I was in a good mental state, and I just kind of sat there with my eyes wide open. And then my mother came, and then then I left just to take a vaping break because I wasn't doing so well. So they gave her the Valium, and she kind of settled down. But even when she was with me, when she was sleeping or resting, so-called, or once they gave her the Valium and she settled down, even then, her breathing and her uh, kind of the sighing at the end of it, it didn't stop. So she would just lay there with her closed eye, and I can't like reproduce it, but it was kind of somewhat harrowing. And so I took a smoking break, and this is when she thought I was leaving for the day, and this is the last kind of conversation I had with her. And she said, good luck to you, best of luck. You need to eat more, like have a good day. Kind of those kind of general sentiments. Even though I told her I'm coming back, but she was a little out of it. And so when I came back, she was resting and she was still breathing heavily. And so at that point, because she was resting and my mother was there, I went home. I met with my stepfather. We picked up my car from there. And then I came home again. I took my father's car, my mother's car again to the hospital. And when I came there, my grandmother was still like throughout the day, she had kind of this breathing and sighing like in sorrow. And but now they said that basically they kind of gave up on her and she was just dying basically. But she was still sighing kind of very heavily, and you could hear the blood kind of gurgle to. You got the mic, Brian, again.
Sorry.
Yep, that's all right. So she was kind of gurgling blood, and I could hear it. And so my mother at that point couldn't take it, anymore, and she just was sitting outside of the room. And so I spent like around 3 hours with my grandmother. At first, when I came in, she seemed maybe a little bit barely conscious, like she turned her head toward me, but she was still kind of sighing very heavily. And so I sat there, I put on the Tara mantra over and over again. They have these like compilations. Well, first we listened to like an old Russian song, like a Soviet song, and we all sobbed. And then my mother left, and I just sat there and kind of like comforted her, like touched her cheek and the brow and like the top uh, of her head, and listened to this mantra again and again and tried to like comfort her. And then, like, after 3 hours, my mother came in, but you could tell that she was dying because she had still this like heavy breathing, and you could see it kind of clearly reduce. And so there, we had a night. Well, just by that progression, we knew that she was dying. And then my mother came in, and she was worried about my mental state, and so we left and sat there for a while and made almost like small talk for half an hour or something. And then when we came back, she was dead. So that was going from my birthday into the next day. And so she died in the beginning, after, into the next day. So. Brian, you have an issue with the microphone. So, Mr. Robbins, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that happened. But as you're explaining that, I mean, it seems like it was probably a very kind and noble thing to do, to sit with her and to try to at least give her some comfort as she was passing.
There's still some issues, Brian. I don't know. Not a lucky day with the mic there. All right, sounds fine. Yep. So you were saying?
I think it was probably a very kind and very noble thing to sit there with her as you did and try to give her comfort in those moments of her passing.
Yeah.
Of course, we can never put ourselves in that position, or probably never will, to know of what value that is or isn't, but it would sure seem like it would be something of a lot of value. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, that was kind of my thought about it. On the one hand, like Green Tara mantra was a little bit like Buddhist proselytizing, but on the other hand, it just kind of helped me myself to sit there instead of just listening to the breathing. And as far as like, it's when she was just starting to breathe rapidly, or when she seemed constrained, I would tell her, you were like the best grandma, and I love you, and things like that. Just try to soothe her, but it is hard to say at that point if it's reflex, or sometimes there seem to be responses, but I just can't say for sure. But kind of, again, elderly people die, but in her case, even her brows were like furrowed, like they were not relaxed. They were not kind of her usual expression. They were like expression of somebody who's going through a lot of stress, and that's kind of remained there until death. And her eyes were not fully closed. They were like a little bit half open. So the whole kind of scene was kind of difficult. So that's why my mother left. So
yeah, it sounds like she kind of struggled through her passing. That's too bad.
yeah. So Brian, you lost some close relatives Can you describe any, in whatever way you like, their kind of passing or just in general?
Yeah. Again, sorry for the mic issues. Let me know if anything happens. I might have to close my browser and restart. But
Yeah.
yeah. So my mother had endometrial cancer for about 6 months before she passed, and I think actually she ended up living about 8 months after the diagnosis, which was only 6 months. And it was that itself was a very horrible process. Um, and she was bedridden for almost half of that time, and the dying process was incredibly slow. She was still fairly young. She was only 47 when she passed,
Yeah.
and it took her after her last. She had a visit to the hospital. They had to, they went in and they tried to remove as much as they could, and it just didn't work out. She went under the knife again, and that time, it was looking much more bleak. And so when she came out from the second surgery and the second time at the hospital, she was much weaker. She looked much older than she actually was. She had about 3 months of chemotherapy, so it was a very difficult process. And then when she got back home, it took about 2 weeks of her under hospice care to finally pass. And I was there. It wasn't pleasant. Her breathing was very shallow, and I mean, she was on drugs, but I don't know if hospice, how they measure the dose or anything like. I don't know those specifics, but she wasn't really conscious most of that time.
Yeah.
And so, she would basically sleep for those 2 weeks. She slept a lot of the time, and then when she wasn't asleep, she was, awake and crying out in pain. And so, when she finally passed, it was something of a relief, oddly, because I knew that her suffering was over. And beyond that, it was strange. I was a much younger man. I was only I think it was 21.
Yeah.
Um, and it was something that was known, so it wasn't sudden. It was very drawn out, and I don't know. Like I can't find a middle ground for what is better, sudden or slow and drawn out. I really don't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I see that my mic is doing strange things. I can't monitor, so I don't have any idea what it's doing. I can try to switch it again or restart my browser if you like.
It seems to be fine now. I mean,
Okay. And then my father also passed. He had esophageal cancer. He died in the hospital. His death was fairly rapid in comparison to my mother's. He was working, and I guess he had been in pain for a while, and his back kind of deteriorated, and his spine broke basically, and the cancer had progressed that far to eat away his spine, and he just kind of ignored it. I really wish I could place those things in some kind of context to like make sense out of it, but apparently at the point of his back actually breaking, he decided to go to the hospital, and there he was only in the hospital for about 5 days before he passed. And at that point, we got him. I talked to him about, you probably don't want them jumping on top of you and trying to resuscitate you, So we got him to sign the. He was very reluctant to sign the DNR, but I think at the end he accepted that it was the right thing. He wouldn't talk about dying. He wouldn't talk about what was coming. he was very lucid up until the last 6 hours.
Yeah.
His the oxygen alarm, it lets the nurses know that someone's dying. Basically, the oxygen alarm had been going off, and at a certain point, I guess they decided, like, hey, we can try to give him a lot of medication to calm him down, because his breathing was kind of in and out. He was in an extreme amount of pain, and so finally, they loaded him up, and I mean his breathing. I don't know. I don't know if he would have passed naturally so quickly. But given the amount of drugs that they gave him, he couldn't go on. So his breathing became very shallow, and then he passed. It was strange. At that point, I gave him sort of his final rite, and I was glad to do that. My mother really didn't have anything like that, so at that point it was good to do that for him.
Yeah.
And as far as my own self composure, I just believe in doing certain things with grace. And it's not that things aren't affecting me, it's just that you conduct yourself a certain way and you deal with the absurdity of life in your own way. And it's not like I wasn't sad or anything. It's just like I just needed to go. I just needed to be out of there.
Yeah.
And so I left. I left before he actually died. But I mean, he was gone. Like there was nothing left to do. After I gave him his final ride, it only took him 20 minutes to die after that. So I left and got the phone call, and it made sense. Yeah. And his death was somewhat unexpected, but at the same time, I had known that he was ignoring certain things, and I wasn't too sure which way it was going to go. So it wasn't like a very, very sudden death or anything like that. But I mean, it was to be expected at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, your mother's death sounds pretty horrifying.
Yeah, that was really much more difficult. And my father was older when he passed. It was much more recently, and he was in his early 60s, so still premature. But my mother's death it put a lot of strange things in perspective. In particular, like religion, with Christ suffering for the sins of all mankind. I don't know. Seemed like an easy way out in comparison to what my mom went through, but whatevs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty horrible, and they couldn't find enough painkillers to really deal with it.
No, I'm really not sure how hospice works. I mean, I was very grateful for them and what they do, and so anything at that point was a help. And I'm kind of glad that she passed at home rather than in the hospital, because it was a very different experience. In the hospital, everything feels, like, hey, let's get this, let's get him out of here so the next guy can die. Like, it's just kind of weird. Like, it has a weird feeling to it. Like, I just really hope at some point, if I'm ever terminally ill like that, I don't want to die in a hospital. I'd much rather die at home, even if it's much more drawn out. But yeah, like it was horrifying. It was horrifying, and the actual death process of her death, I'd rather not go into. But the body does things to let you know that it's not functioning. That it's ending, and those things were very strange. Especially for me, I had never seen anyone die. I mean, I'd had people in my family die, older people pass. But at a certain point, you have to detach yourself to a degree from what's occurring, and almost look at it in a third person kind of sense. You see yourself outside of yourself, sort of, and it's very difficult to deal with. And then, the next I mean, the next 10 years of my life was basically processing. I mean, you lost your grandmother. I'm sure you knew your grandmother since you were a small child, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a person who's very close to you. I mean, it'll take you years and years to process it. All of my grandparents died before I was into my teenage years, and so I never really had an elder connection with them. And so when they passed, it wasn't so extreme. I definitely loved them, but it wasn't the same as knowing someone for, for so many years, for decades and decades,
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I'm sorry about your loss, especially your mother. I mean, that sounds like hyper intense. My grandmother, I mean, she basically raised me. So it wasn't kind of like a more distant relationship many people have. But I mean, she was in her 80s, so I mean, like I said, older people die, but she did die in a kind of a difficult way. Um, yeah, they were pretty much like done with her in many ways. They wanted to push her on to hospice, but we kind of resisted there. And I think at a certain point they just kind of gave up and really hardly ever visited her. Like on the day she died, the doctor never came in. He just kind of like phoned in.
Yeah.
Even though, like, the day before, I mean, she was not dying.
Right.
I mean, she was in a bad state, but she just had a heart surgery. So anyway, that's kind of, we thought that she can kind of recover from this heart surgery and live on a little longer, but that didn't happen. But yeah, it was the first kind of a person close to me who died, and she's kind of as close to me as my parents. Because my parents had me when they were younger, and there was the Soviet Union with its kind of welfare state. And then if they lived in America, they wouldn't have had me until the types of people they were, like, wouldn't have had me and had children until they're like 30s. But back in the Soviet Union, they just had me younger, and then they started their professional careers. And then I was just kind of left with grandmother, and she really raised me. So yeah. So the other thing I've kind of experienced here is crying. I talk big about kind of salty tears, but I haven't. I don't really cry that often. The last time I cried was in 2014, and then was like before having a kind of falling into a depression. And this time, like the first time I cried was actually after editing some clips of the Dalai Lama, and I actually like cried for the Dalai Lama passing away. There's one clip that made me sentimental, and then I got up from my chair and I like started sobbing. So it was interesting that it was kind of rerouted through the Dalai Lama. And then like a couple of times I cried visiting her. Like this one time I came to see her and she said, we're going to go home and drink tea and eat cookies together. And that was really kind of difficult. And I've noticed that whenever I cry, I have a kind of a universal kind of tears, almost like saintly tears for the world, for the suffering of the world. So how did you, well, Brian, when have you actually cried recently, and like how do you experience it?
I assume that you mean out of sadness?
Yeah.
Rather than like tears of joy?
Yeah.
Last time I cried out of sadness, I can't really recall. It's probably been over 6 months. I don't, I do have somewhat of depressive kind of episodes. I wouldn't say I'm clinically depressed in any way, but I do have sadness and sad times, and I try to process things as they come rather than bottle them up. And I have to say that everything has really changed ever since having a child. Whenever I'm with her, I almost cry on a daily basis.
Wow.
Just tears of joy, though, not sadness. It's just it's so much overwhelming happiness that it can't be contained or expressed through normal means. It just is overwhelming. It's overwhelming at times. But sadness, I really can't recall the last time.
Mr. Robbins?
No, I can't recall the last time I cried either, to be honest. I know that as I'm getting older, and it's almost a little bit embarrassing, is that if I'm like in a theater or something, and it can be something like just the corniest of movies, when the music comes up, sometimes I do have to hold it back, and I'm thinking, this is just so dumb. It's just a dumb superhero movie. Where does this come from? But it has something to do, I guess, with getting older. But at the same time, I think too that like if someone close to me were to pass, I don't know that I would like really have that kind of sentimental outburst. But it would be something probably because I could prepare for,
Yeah, I mean, in this case, like, I had kind of two sort of conflicting kind of things where, on the one hand, I actually felt like genuinely kind of tender and open to the suffering of others. On the other hand, there was a kind of that sense of meaninglessness versus my kind of a Buddhist worldview, kind of the acid of meaninglessness of it all just kind of hitting against my current kind of hyper sense of meaning with Buddhism. So I both had this kind of a universal kind of compassion about the suffering of others, and it was kind of beneficial to not just kind of close in on yourself, but also have that present. But on the other hand, there's always kind of this sense that it's so kind of meaningless and people die, and seemingly, you're there for them to die with you, but simultaneously they're alone and kind of consumed in their own kind of pain and stress, even as they are dying. So, yeah, that's kind of what I experienced. But I was just grateful for people in my life, and just kind of being there with grandmother. You realize that out of however many billions of people there are now, I think over 7 billion, 9 is it now? That out of however many people there are just very few people who really kind of give a shit about you, who have love for you or unconditional love for you like she did for me. And that any kind of connection with people, a genuine connection, even with subscribers who still kind of stick around for some reason. Yeah, anything like that is really precious. I mean, it is a cliche, but that's kind of not something you can really acquire. Somebody who actually cares about you, and so yeah, I was kind of had those overall sentiments.
Yeah, the thing you said about unconditional love too. It's it's hard enough just to find people to kind of stick around and weather you through the good and the bad. But even then, it's like there are a lot of conditions most of the time placed on that. So to have gone, to have had that kind of unconditional love from somebody, that's a pretty precious thing to lose.
Yeah. And yeah, what else did I have here? Yeah, I mean, it was just an interesting time, like having the swirl of depression versus sadness, and observing how they're different. Sadness is more kind of connected with life, whereas depression is just something that is not connected with life, something that removes you from it. And just experiencing those two kind of simultaneously or an alternation between the two was interesting to observe, because depression is sadness is more social. It's connected with other loved ones. It's connected with the world. Whereas depression is more kind of, I don't know, numbing or heavy, kind of sinks you down into numbness. And I'm not saying this for the sake of self-pity, just trying to categorize the two. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much was my week. Yeah, so since then, kind of, I've become a little bit more numb to it, and have been, I have been eating a lot less. Like, I've just been eating pretty much a meal a day. So I need to kind of straighten that out. But, well, you got the mic issue again. Yeah, so that's basically it. Mr. Robbins?
Yeah, I would just maybe suggest trying to keep the best that you can, trying to keep an eye on yourself. Since you mentioned this to me yesterday, I kind of got to thinking about the value of having, and I don't mean this to be sexist, but the value of having like female influences in our lives. Whether it's relatives or romantic relationships or just the people you work with. I would say my experience is that, like, as guys, when we go through trouble or have difficult situations, a lot of the times our advice is kind of to one another, or our ways of dealing with it are kind of like, well, what do I need to do for you to get your mind off of this so that you can move forward?
Yeah.
And my experience with a lot of the women in my life has been that they're a bit more attuned, I think, to kind of trying to read between the lines of what's going on with us, and trying to analyze us and help us in ways that that guys just aren't very comfortable doing. So, having that female influence out of your life now, who might have been able to help work through some difficulties. I don't know. I guess that's all I'd have to say, is try to maybe keep an eye on yourself.
Yeah. Let's see. So, yeah. So the other thing I had is kind of thinking about how Buddhism is like not a very comforting religion. In a sense, like people say Buddhism isn't a religion, and in a sense, like when somebody dies, that's kind of true, because it's like, well, they have their own karma. Anything you experience in life is because of, like, you're just kind of strangers passing through like an intersection of your existence, and then like there was no real kind of Buddha to appeal to like and now like grandma is with Buddha in heaven really doesn't kind of work in this way, because it's ultimately like their own path. And yeah, so it has kind of elements of realism there with preparing you for death and suffering, but it really doesn't have the same kind of a comforting aspect to it, which I'm not saying is necessarily a bad thing. It's just kind of an observation. All right, Mr. Robbins, any thoughts there?
Well, I mean, not really. I mean, I don't know what to say about, religion offering comfort or not. I really don't have anything to add.
Yeah. So, yeah, the last thing I'll mention is that like my grandmother had some of the same issues I did, as far as like with mental health, and without going into details, at one point she had like a personal crisis and she wanted to reverse it, and she believed in kind of this one person having magical powers to be able to reverse it, and it gotten to a point where she was like put into a mental institution. And later on, in no likelihood she had what I had. I don't want to be an armchair psychiatrist, but uh, they kind of diagnosed her with schizophrenia. But I'm pretty sure she just had like a bipolar episode, because, but it did basically change her life past that point, where after that it was hard to be kind of a normal adult. She was more of like a person on disability, and this has kind of affected her, even though her behavior for the most part has been normal since, after a certain point. And this kind of also kind of encouraged me to think about like finally drifting out of my own kind of drifting through life, and kind of bullshitting around with making jokes about it. In the meantime, it affects my inner life while I kind of fuck around and joke around with it, with the Buddhist stuff. So I guess I'll go on an antipsychotic, to see if I can tame it down and just kind of, I guess, maybe go back to being a good YouTube creator and making Peterson videos, I suppose, stuff like that. So that was the other thought. Brian?
Sure. I've had lots of thoughts in terms of Buddhism and death and things like that. In China, they always are Buddhists at the end of their lives because they're hoping for a better rebirth, you know? And I think that while that's a wonderful sentiment, that's not what Buddhism is really teaching. And I've tried to reconcile some of these things, because when you think about, when you really contemplate the emptiness and meditate on yourself and what you are in the world, and this existential kind of crisis of like you're going to die, like life is suffering, etc., etc. Buddhism almost, to me at least, tends to equalize death and being alive, or the experience, the visceral experience of being alive, in that it says that death isn't so bad of a thing, and life isn't so great of a thing. And is it so terrible to be dead? And is it so wonderful to be alive? And in that sort of balance, that you achieve this understanding of it's some kind of equilibrium with your own existence.
Yeah,
And
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
it's something that you can really only experience on a personal, meditative level. It's not really something that you can fully articulate.
Yeah, I mean, Buddhism sets up an afterlife where you almost like just dying is preferable, basically.
Yeah,
Because it's like now you continue onward based on your karma. You don't control your mind fully. You just give it certain directions. And so even if you have a great rebirth, it's going to end eventually, and you're going to be thrown back into the cycle of suffering. So yeah, I mean, Buddhism is, in that sense, like, it's kind of like a win-win, you could say. You either die and you go nowhere, or well, you just continue somewhere.
or you become enlightened and you find your way out, or
Yeah.
you basically are annihilated.
Well, you remain as a presence if you're awakened. You remain as a general presence, but it's hard to kind of put into words. Yeah. So, let's see here. What else did I have? Yeah, I mean, I think that it was just an interesting period of like tenderness, and for me, like just tenderness, and I kind of hope to retain that kind of a sense of vulnerability and being kind of kicked out of your routine, and not just being kind of crystallized in your routines and in your repetitive thoughts, but even kind of keep your heart open, because I was really kind of empathic with different people around me, more so than I would otherwise. I kind of reflected on their own suffering and the suffering of their loved ones, and how kind of that dimension of life that you normally don't see in other people, and when you experience it, you see others as being more multidimensional.
Well, hopefully that's something you can carry forward. I mean, yeah, that kind of that stark reality of seeing that, yeah, probably is a wake up call to a lot of us, that we could be a bit more empathetic and sympathetic at times, and we just get caught up in our day to day routines. So,
yeah, but I'm even talking about like that kind of trying to retain it as a healthy state of openness to others, just on a level of the heart. But I don't think that I will succeed with this, frankly. I think it'll probably fade, but I hope to retain it, because at some point we are going to get weak and die, and people that we love are going to get weak and die. And if you can have open-hearted attitude toward that reality and others, then when it comes to your own, it's not going to be like a shock. It's just going to be a continuation. Any thoughts? Did you have those experiences, Brian?
Yeah, immediately it was. It's strange because for me, when my mother passed when I was in my early 20s, that was kind of this Kickstarter to me acting in the world and doing things that I wanted to do. And so I don't think I beheld that consciously at the time. I think I was actually pretty unaware of what was going on in terms of my own emotions and internal processes. But I did start doing things in a much more forceful manner, probably too forceful, but I moved, I moved across the country. I went, just ran around, did whatever I wanted basically for a few years, and then started to focus on what I wanted to do in terms of work and art and things like that, books I wanted to read, those types of things. And it was a wonderful motivator in that sense. But it also produced a massive amount of anxiety and PTSD, and I live with the feeling that death is just around the corner, basically every waking moment. So it isn't necessarily a pleasant thing. It's more like, hurry up and do your stuff, get your stuff done. And I drive myself. I burn myself out. I drive myself to exhaustion on certain things and projects at times, and need a fair amount of time to recharge afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, the situation like with your mother, I mean, it just sounds horrifying. I mean, that's not just losing your mother at a young age, but also experiencing her suffering. Because like there is a conclusion to life. Like you could say this person lived, they had good experiences and bad experiences, they've accomplished things in life. And like I could say with my grandmother, she had a difficult life. She was born during World War II, then had the issues I just outlined. But she spent like the last 7 years with her children here, with her people she loved. However, like to that kind of suffering of her last kind of days, the confusion, specifically the suffering of her last day, there is no narrative around that. It just kind of happened and it defined her last moments. And so I really kind of, what you've experienced obviously is more than what I have experienced here, because, she was older. She wasn't, even though I love my grandmother dearly, I mean, she, wasn't my mother, and, and her passing was not as difficult. So I really kind of empathize with what happened with you.
Yeah, it wasn't pleasant or easy by any means, and
Yeah,
it's interesting to have had that at that phase in my life, because I was really changing as a person, and I do feel that I was, tangibly myself in that, like, I'm an adult, I'm aware of the functioning of the world, and like I understood my parents' place, and so I was able to have meaningful conversations with my mother before she died.
yeah,
And I'm thankful for that at the very least, even though I was still relatively young and stupid. Um, I'm lucky that I did get those times with her, and I think that in terms of her own life, she was probably very hard on herself and felt as though she was a failure, um, and that's something that I never wanted her to feel, but I don't know if she could help it toward the end. She was generally hard on herself, um, and then to be in the midst of a struggle, and ours in particular was financial, um, and then to then become terminally ill and then leave your family, I think is the worst feeling of all.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it just sounds like a horrible thing. Yeah, you kind of have the cliches to say I'm sorry that that happened, but that just sounds like nightmarish.
yeah, unpleasant. It still sticks with me. It's just like it happened just yesterday.
Yeah, like there is a kind of a conclusion to a life, but there is no like conclusion to suffering. I mean, it's just there. So I mean, you can just kind of ignore it or acknowledge it, but um, there is no narrative conclusion there. Let's see. Yeah, so there is this article that I found. Anyway, let's see. So this like describes. This is about the experiences of people who are dying. Uh, Half dreaming, half waking state is common in dying uh, people. 72% of patients dreamed about reuniting with people who had already died. 59% said they dreamed about getting ready to travel somewhere. 28% dreamed about meaningful experiences in the past. Let's see. For most of the patients, the dreams were comforting and positive. Yeah, so then they close their eyes. My impression is that this is not a coma, a state of unconsciousness, as many families and clinicians think, but something like a dream state. Okay. Uh,
Speaking of dream states and maybe what the dying person is experiencing, I've always been kind of curious about the the lack of oxygen to the brain when the brain is actually seizing and having these enormous electrical sort of bursts going through it. I'm sure that you've had moments where time has sort of slowed down for you.
yeah.
Um, Maybe in a moment of like adrenaline or something terrible was you anticipated something terrible happening. But I tend to think that in those moments, in those final breaths, or in the final moments of actually dying before the brain shuts down,
Hmm.
um,
Well,
that there might be a chance for some type of grand death hallucination.
that's exactly what I was like looking for here. It says recent research points out to the sharpening of the senses. Some people report also seems to match what we know about brain's response to dying. Neuroscientist at the University of Michigan first became intrigued by the subject when she noticed something strange in the brains of animals in another experiment. Just before the animals died, neurochemicals in the brain suddenly surged. While scientists have known that brain neurons continue to fire after a person died, this was different. The neurons were secreting new chemicals and in large amounts. so they parallel this with people like those after death experiences, past life experiences people have, or like what is like after death experiences or whatever they're called, when they see the light.
Yeah, near death experience.
Yeah. So they kind of equate it to the strange firing of the brain on all cylinders before you die. And that's just kind of a strange kind of a thing. Like, why would the brain like suddenly light up before death? It's kind of an unusual. I think it's kind of a bizarre thing. Like, why would it do it? You know?
Yeah, like what is the actual function of that process?
Yeah, so they killed 8 rats here and stopped their hearts, and suddenly all the different regions of the brain became synchronized. She says the rat's brain showed higher power and different frequency waves, and also what is known as coherence, the electrical activity from different parts of the brain working together. Yeah, so that's just an interesting aspect of the brain. Like, I mean, why would the brain like announce, "Hey, you know, I'm gonna fire on all cylinders like the last hurrah" or something?
Well, I think it's exactly that, and that's where DMT and other chemicals come into play in your brain.
Yeah.
Like what would the purpose be? I don't know. I mean, final release and comfort in your dying moments, I suppose. But how such a thing develops on an evolutionary scale, I have no idea, or why, or if that's just the nature of complex brains that in their dying uh, moments they try to reformulate reality in their dying uh, moments.
Maybe it's like kind of like an electroshock where the brain tries to restart all systems. Maybe, I don't know. That's the best idea I have. Mr. Robbins, any theories?
Um, I'm trying to think of it in terms of like the body going into shock. That's something I wonder about a lot. Like, you know, in moments of extreme physical distress, I wonder if your body, like if you knew that you were going to burn alive, or that you were falling off a building, or if you had fallen off a building, or your parachute isn't opening, that your body just shuts down. You don't necessarily die from the burning. That could take quite a while. But your body just said, your mind and body says it's time to shut down. And I wonder if, as we are dying, if there's something similar to that going on, more in the brain than just with the body, but we're just having almost like a reaction of shock, where it's just shutting things down.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not. It's kind of like if your heart was shutting down and then it suddenly like started. I mean, I guess but that's not exactly what the brain is doing. I don't know. I mean, it's like.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think that we know, like, what happens physiologically during the state of shock.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not. It's like the body is growing weaker and weaker, and the heart is shutting down, and then the brain is like, "Fuck it," you know. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know. That's the only one useful article I've ever read in the Atlantic recently. So the last thing I'll kind of bring up here in relation to this is that I was still reflecting on this and being kind of. I mean, I'm still kind of reflecting on this, but I went to a kind of a party of sorts, a birthday party, like the first birthday party I guess I had since teenage years. And Mr. Robbins was one of the attendees, one of the guests, and we went to dine at Bob Evans. Brian, do you frequent Bob Evans?
I have no idea what Bob Evans is.
You don't even know what Bob Evans is?
No, I'm on the East Coast, and I've only lived on on the West Coast, East Coast, and Southwest, and we don't have Bob Evans.
Amazing.
Bob Evans would probably best be described as, a chain specializing in kind of like comfort food. So things like fried chicken, meatloaf, pot roast, just to give you a heads up of
Like a Golden Corral, like a buffet.
No, it's not a buffet. It's a set down restaurant. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah. Steak all day, family meals, breakfast. Are you tempted, Brian?
Not in the slightest degree.
This is the home style fried chicken. This is what you had?
Yeah, that's what I had. Now, Brian, are you familiar at all with Cracker Barrel?
Yes.
Okay, so I would describe Bob Evans as maybe along the same lines, maybe a step down slightly in quality, but for the most part, much of the same like style of food.
Yeah, it's less. I find it less annoying than Cracker Barrel. Look at this sirloin and steak, amazing, and shrimp. Well, anyway, this is where we went for my birthday. It's kind of like somewhat of a hipster thing to do, I guess, for the meta hipsters like ourselves. And we went there, and I just was interested to know, like, I have this theory that the reason that there is so much like depression and angst today is because of how antisocial you are. All of us are. I mean, it's not an idea unique to me by any means, but it's kind of, I've noticed how, like, because I didn't particularly enjoy going to this Bob Evans with Mr. Robbins and my other friend. It had something to do with my other friend somewhat, because he kind of likes to, let's say, bust my balls or something, and we know each other forever, even though in this case I really didn't so much appreciate it. But anyway, I really kind of spent most of my time there looking out the window as Mr. Robbins was talking with my friend. Let's call him Boris. However, I still noticed that even in spite of this, it in some way, like, it takes you out of your head, and your mood kind of, in spite of itself, gets synchronized with other people. So even though I wasn't particularly enjoying my time at Bob Evans, just with being with these people, and it's like if you live in a village or you're constantly surrounded by people and family, even if you don't like living with them and you prefer to have your own place, you still, if you interact with them, you still synchronize with them on one level or another. Like pack animals have to be alert to each other to some degree, even if they don't want to be. Well, I didn't mind being there, but but it's just this synchronicity of mood, a subtle synchronicity of mood, kind of takes you out of your head and kind of restarts the system. Any reflections on that, Matt, Brian?
None.
None? You don't agree with this?
I see exactly. I see what you're saying. I'm just kind of like more like, okay, give me some more. Give me some examples. What happened? What happened to Bob Evans?
Well, nothing happened. It's like my friend Boris took a few fucking shots at me, kind of little bullshit jokes. We've known each other for like 20 years, but I really kind of wasn't. I don't know, like I wasn't hypersensitive to it, but I just sort of thought it was kind of juvenile at this moment. So I was kind of mildly annoyed and just looked out the window. I don't even know if annoyed is the word. But
you feel like you've outgrown your friendship with Boris?
Well, the thing is, it's like we've just known each other for 20 years. So I'm just kind of interested in keeping it going. But in some ways, we're just different people, and I've just kind of gotten used to it. And he's a great guy, and he's a great guy, and in fact, he bought me my meal yesterday. But so we just interact like once a month or whatever. So therefore, but basically, yeah, mostly Mr. Robbins was speaking with Boris, and I was just looking out the window. But I wasn't miserable there. I just kind of zoned out. But I thought that even in this experience, just because they were talking about things that really were of little interest to me, that still kind of being in the presence and just having to follow the conversation kind of synchronized my mind and focused my brain on something else. Whereas if you have some sort of a mopey thought or a sad thought, justified or not, didn't fucking mean that to rhyme. But if it kind of, if there are no checks and balances on it coming from other people, it becomes like a germ and it metastasizes. I'm not saying that there aren't people who are predisposed toward mental illness. I am. But nevertheless, like even within that, if you spend a lot of time alone, you have no balance to it. And in order to receive balance to your thoughts, in order to take you outside of the head, you have to be in situations with other people where, you know, you it's not your idea of happiness, let's say. Of course, hanging out with Mr. Robbins is always my idea of happiness. But it's just, you know, being around other people kind of makes your brain function in a different way. You don't look for problems as much.
Yes, right. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I see what you're saying. I can't recall an experience of that, but I see what you're saying. I mean, I'm not having crippling anxiety as I'm speaking to you guys.
Yeah.
So that's helping. I mean, that's anything, you know.
Mr. Robbins, thoughts on that?
I guess a lot of it depends on how healthy you feel those experiences that pull you out of yourself are for you. And I'm not trying to say that, you know, because I was there or Boris was there, but from a personal standpoint, I've found that forcing myself into situations and forcing myself into trying to find appropriate situations to somewhat routinely get into, to force myself out of myself, is probably has been very healthy for me. And it's not always instances where, like, you know, we were stuck together and forced to socially interact. It could be going to, you know, a concert or a ball game or whatever, where you're forcing yourself to be pulled outside of yourself. You know, there are other people around. If it's just them that you're observing and listening to, or paying attention to a game or roller derby or a movie, whatever it is. I mean, again, it's completely subjective whether or not however a person feels, how much of that they need or don't need. But I've personally found that pretty something that's been helpful for me. And again, sometimes you have to force yourself to do it. Like now in the wintertime, as it is right now, the weather being as shitty as it is, I mean, it's not the most pleasant thing to like go out and do anything. But I find that like after a full day of just being in, it's like I got to get out and do something. Just go to an arcade and play pinball, or go somewhere and watch football and have a few beers.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's like there is that cliche that the poor sometimes are happier than the rich, especially in like poor countries, that idea. And I think that it's somewhat of a cliche and it kind of minimizes things. But when it comes to neuroticism, I do think that the poor are a lot less neurotic. And I do think that just even you have to gossip with these people, you have to be around them. You're not exactly happy to just be stuck in that village or wherever the fuck you live. But you're always connected and tied with people. And so this constant reflecting on yourself, constant reevaluation of yourself, even as your barriers for social interactions get higher and higher as you develop consumer preferences for people, you know, I mean, if you're stuck in a social situation, I think in certain ways it creates a floor because your mood is kind of synchronized with these people consistently. Synchronized, not that it creates a magical bridge of happiness from you to another person, but it creates like a level, like a ceiling and a floor for your kind of neuroticism and kind of confines it this way. That's my thought.
Yeah, it was almost like we were talking yesterday between Boris and I, talking about like being able to shift between different social groups. And like on the one hand, in this group over here, like it brings out a different part of myself, and a part of myself that, you know, sometimes you may sort of want to flex a little bit.
Yeah.
And then over here in another social situation, it's like, no, I can't be, you know, the guy that sits at the bar and just, you know, gets to be more unfiltered. Over here, you know, I'm in a more professional environment, but I can express a different side of myself over here. So this idea that society kind of forces you into a certain role, or forces you to conform to whatever the standard is true, but there are other options of kind of the standards that, or the feeling of the group that you put yourself into.
Well, when you're by yourself, you manage your own thoughts in connection with reality. And then when you manage these thoughts, some of them get out of control and become negative habits of mind. And that's kind of those related to neuroticism and self-evaluation and where do I belong. Whereas if you are around other people, like, part of your thought management gets outsourced to the group, or at least you have to be connected with the group and you have to pay attention to them, and you can't be consumed with your own shit in the same way. And so that kind of a negative piece of shit doesn't grow like in a petri dish when you're isolated. And so just by being there and like talking about different stuff, you know, it kind of prevents this shit from fostering. I think it kind of balances out our mind. It's like all the social part of our brain, if you like, gets filtered inward when you're alone. All those resources get filtered inward, and when you're around other people, even if you're not having a great time, that is occupied by observing them and kind of synchronizing your mood with them, or some shit. It's not gonna work every time, but if it continuously happens, it has a cumulative positive effect, I feel. And Brian, any final thoughts on this?
So, I mean, from that, like, the more isolated people become, the more terrible the world gets, the worse every single individual person's experience is. And we are just kind of tumbling down this pipeline of misery,
Yes.
all alone, while somehow all together online, and yet not in person. It's nice to have in-person people. Like, I feel like I have just enough in my own life, and I see what you're saying with kind of synchronizing and that the social mind outside of just being isolated and like turning all those things inward, and like what does a mind do in that case? Like, I'm very much an introvert, and so I do, you know, I'm a writer, so I write stories because of those feelings and interactions, and like Mr. Robbins was saying, you're different people. You're a different person when you're with different people. So dependent on whatever state you're sort of in that group, that sort of determines your mindset when you're with those particular people. And then you start to get into other interesting things like group bias and mob mentality, and you know, all those wonderful things that can happen when you get with the wrong bunch, maybe. When you go to drink the Kool-Aid, you know.
All right. So this brings me to the something I have received during my trip to Bob Evans. Something I have received from Mr. Robbins, my birthday gift. Actually, there are two. So this is the first. Now, Brian, are you jealous of this?
I'm very jealous. It doesn't it harken? It just harkens back to Mother Russia, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Look at that. It's nice.
I think this is the crude ethnic cliche that Mr. Robbins is going for.
I like that.
Mr. Robbins, did you
That'll be the essence of the smell of Mother Russia in that box right there.
yeah, I wonder, did you purchase like a collection like this for yourself, since it was such a great gift?
No. As I told you, that was the. Well, I'll say that I made that purchase at Gabriel Brothers.
Mhm.
So for people not familiar, that's they just have a lot of different. Their inventory is never stable. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Like a
And
TJ Maxx or something.
Yeah.
yeah, kind of a step down from maybe a step down or two from TJ Maxx. But I'd noticed, in addition to the John Cena cologne that they no longer had, that they routinely have some of these Adidas hygiene products. And I'd always had it in my mind that that might make an appropriate gift for you. But I guess given the holiday season, they must be very, very popular. That was the only Adidas hygiene product they had left.
Does the aroma strike you as something you would wear, Ivan?
This is, I guess, this is the aftershave, or what is this? This is Pure Game. This
Oh,
is,
well, of course. See, you had Pure Game even before this, so I guess you're going to have Meta Game.
You have been bestowed Pure Game.
yeah, this is like a a real, that authentic $1 smell, $1 cologne smell. Let's see. And then we have this. This is actually useful. What the fuck? Body spray.
How is it?
I don't know. I mean, it has a very strange kind of a smell to it. Like it sounds like alcohol with like some like citrus in it or something.
It's a very male gift, Mr. Robbins.
I mean, like, I honestly can't say that it like smells good.
Well, hopefully it's not some,
It really has a very strange smell. It sounds like somebody like ate some lemons and like drank a bottle of cheap vodka and like threw up on my arm.
Oh, well, I hope it's not like some bootleg flea market Adidas stuff. I hope it's authentic.
And then, of course,
you gotta spray it on your balls to get the real effect,
Yeah. Honestly, like, I'm not even being like, I would have no issue using this, but the smell really is kind of peculiar. It's very just kind of, it really is just a strange smell. Like, I am kind of surprised. And then there's this Pure Game body wash. Now, Mr. Robbins Gel Douche. This is called Body Wash Gel Douche.
Well,
you got to give it a minute on your skin to mix with your natural pheromones.
And this is the body, hair, and face. Now, Mr. Robbins, do you have a separate shampoo from your body wash?
No. I use bar soap. I'm old school. I'm boomer.
Oh, really? Oh, right.
On your hair?
I have so little hair that soap up there isn't much of an issue.
Well, okay. I mean, I don't know. Well, thank you, Mr. Robbins. I mean, I can say that like it's pleasant to grip, like it's pleasant to the touch. But yeah, I mean, I was really surprised that even like they messed up like a cheap cologne, like just a cheap body spray. But anyway, I will use the 3-in-1 body, hair, and face. I will use this for sure. I don't care like how shitty it smells. I wonder if these Adidas products are available in Germany. Somehow I doubt it. But thank you, Mr. Robbins. But
Well,
this was not.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. And this was not the end of your generosity, because you have also included this beef jerky.
Correct.
Now, Mr. Robbins, did you? Was there nothing else available? Was your like $20 budget being stretched by this $15 purchase that you had to throw in something for like $3?
Well, what I can say is that, it was really busy yesterday. I felt I was running a little late at Bob's, for Bob's. I didn't have enough time to really find much of anything else. So, at the checkout counter, the line was really big and long, and the lady was like really sort of forceful, instructing people that go there, go there, go there, go there. So at the last moment, I saw that. I thought it would be appropriate. That's how that all came about.
Not only like I don't like pepper jerky, but that's okay. I appreciate it, Mr. Robbins. I'm glad you swung by like the dog treat section and got the small bag for me.
Well, maybe you can throw it in the door in the same drawers you probably have your nacho cheese beef jerky stick I gave you that time.
Yeah, and I don't even remember what happened to that one. I certainly remember of it, but I don't remember what happened to it.
Your nacho cheese Slim Jim?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just not sure what happened with that gift. Maybe I ate it. I wonder. Like, I usually don't throw away food, but I'm also not like given random food that often. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Robbins. Thank you for this kind of Adidas suite. I'm sure I can court many young honeys with it at the Dharma Center with these strange cologne smell that really is strange. It really is vaguely unpleasant.
Are you unwilling to unveil your recent purchase that would go along with this? Are you going to fail to mention that?
Oh, yeah, I guess.
I mean, this would be complete coordination.
Let's see. Well, anyway, I did get my first Adidas tracksuit.
Look at that. Beautiful.
Yeah, just imagine that sweet body spray.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Fucking shit. Anyway, yeah, I guess I'll save it for happier times. I'll save that Adidas tracksuit for happier occasions. This is like the tree that I bought for my grandmother for the hotel, for the hospital room, but it arrived after she died. So, anyways, sorry about that. Well, anyway, I guess I also have this, which is completely unrelated. Mr. Robbins, have you ever collected this?
No, what is that?
Brian?
I can't say I know what that is. I don't.
You don't know what this is? Mr. Robbins, would you care to guess?
It looks like a small nest.
It's intimately connected with me. Let's put it this way.
I have something in mind, but I don't want to say it.
No, go ahead.
I hope it's not your pubic hair.
No, it's my beard hair that I shave.
Okay.
You guys have never done this, or?
I've never saved it. No.
Right, but
No.
okay. I thought you would have. I thought you would have recognized it. Sometimes I do this, but I don't know.
Well, it does look like maybe you've groomed since yesterday. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Are you going to put that with the others, Ivan?
I'm sorry.
Do you have a collection?
Oh, no. I did this a couple of times in my life. It's kind of a
okay.
nice fuzzy ball. Women can't do this.
It's true.
I mean, hypothetically they could, but it would take them longer time, I guess.
Yeah.
Mr. Robbins, any thoughts on
No.
this?
No.
No reflections?
No.
Okay.
Either of you guys, any big plans for the coming year? Any big plans for change?
Uh,
Any particular goals in mind?
I have many goals. I don't know if the stream is appropriate for that. Ivan?
No, I don't. I don't really have any goals. Just sort of, I don't know, try to be normal, I guess. Try to lead a normal life. All right, my friends. Well, with that, um, I'd like to say that thank you for watching, and I do appreciate my subscribers. I did, it's nice to talk about these things and have somebody listen. It's kind of maybe not the kind of a merry stream that the public deserves, but it's what I was able to deliver. But I do hope that while we're in a kind of in this kind of a space, to say that life is short, we grow weak and we die. But if we connect with our tenderness through empathy toward others, in that case, those experiences, there's going to be a tender flow from your suffering to your death. And I'm not being ironic. There's just going to be an open-hearted tenderness, or at least a greater potentiality to it than through isolation, I think. And with that, those are my concluding thoughts. So thank you, all of you, for watching, and have a great rest of the year, and have a happy new year, and have a happy Christmas. Thank you.